Good morning and welcome to chapter 14, British Popular Culture since 1945. And we're on cinema now, and I was pointing out the importance of the fact that you need a lot of money to make a film, and therefore you need to persuade investors, you're unlikely to have the money yourself, that this film is going to be successful. And one of the ways of doing this is showing them that it is part of a genre that has already been successful. And I showed this last time about British heritage films putting forward a particular traditional view of Britain. And today I want to look at humor. Now, Britain is it's famous for its humor, although nobody seems to really be able to define British humor. Certainly, it seems that that humor is omnipresent in Britain. If you go to a shop and buy a newspaper and nobody makes a joke, that's almost a problem. That's almost a problem. And certainly at certain moments in the past, for example, at the 2012 opening ceremony for the Olympic Games, an example I use very often because this is one of the rare moments when a country has a possibility to showcase what it has to offer to an audience of hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world. And when the British team did this, in 2012, they put on the show about at least an hour long, which showed the things that British people were supposed to be proud of, but in very much a sort of modern 21st century way. And in particular, it showed pride in the National Health Service, showed pride in British humour, British popular music, that all these things were at the centre of the show. Also the royal family, but as a modern humorous royal family. So it's very, very sophisticated show. It's very interesting that humour should be really put in the forefront. And this means that when you're a British film director, and you want to make a funny film, you have more chance of getting investment money than if you want to make another kind of film. So let's have a look at some of the examples. Now, very famous Monty Python. Now, Monty Python began on the television, on the BBC in the 60s. And then moved on to cinema. And Monty Python, the Holy Grail in 1974 was one of the very much avant-garde kinds of cinema, where rather than a particular story, it was more a collection of sketches around a theme. And the theme was the search for the Holy Grail in medieval Britain by Sir Lancelot and a whole load of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. So at the center of this film was the idea of taking a legend, a very mysterious, respected legend of the mists of the English past, and making it something extremely ridiculous, where the contrast between how seriously the characters take it and how absurd the situation is makes the humor work to some extent. Now, it's not easy to know why it works. This is the sort of film where if you read an article about it in French, it always uses words like décalé, which is extremely difficult to define, except that it's off the side of something. But then the Monty Python did very well with that. Now, in these sketches in Monty Python, The Holy Grail, they stick to talking about and mocking this great myth of the past, which allows perhaps the film to be less dated than some of their sketches, because they wrote sketches for the television. And these included very many classic sketches, which are still remembered today, but also a number of sketches, in particular homophobic sketches, which are forgotten, and it's probably better that they are forgotten. They continued 5 years later with Life of Brian. Then Life of Brian, a slightly different well, similar in one way, that they took an extremely respected story from the mist of the past and made it look completely ridiculous. They had a little protest from some Christians who didn't like it, although others liked it very much. But no serious problem. I think perhaps nevertheless a general let's mock the gospel film was something quite new in 1979, although it has to be said that it certainly was mocked, not in a way, I think it would be very difficult to see this as an anti-religious film for most people. So what other well-known comedies, humorous films can we look at? Well, along these same lines in some ways, because John Cleese is from the Monty Python team, and so comes in with films like this, A Fish Named Wanda, and also another British film, Clockwork, which again sees John Cleese in ridiculous situations. Perhaps you know of John Cleese's television series, particularly famous Fawlty Towers, where he plays the hard done to director of a rather moth-eaten hotel. So A Fish Called Wanda, or what can we say about this? Again, it's a tale of murder, lust, greed. It's a bunch of criminals trying to do something in particular. Now, it does have a couple of elements which I've already mentioned in connection with British cinema and how it manages to survive, and that is the Englishman and the American woman love interest. Very important, very, very frequent in British films. You got a British man and an American woman. Why? It helps to sell in the American markets. And in particular, if you can show some sort of conflict between somebody being typically British, stereotypically British, if you like, and somebody being typically American, well, this is something that Americans love to watch. Perhaps British people do, I don't know, but my impression is that Americans love to watch this, and this is what we will see in this film. Not to abandon a formula that works. In Four Weddings and a Funeral, you have a stereotypically British man and an American woman, and in Notting Hill you have a stereotypically British man and an American woman. This is obviously a formula, which does not mean that, although they're using the formula partly to get the funding, this does not mean that they are not in some ways quality films. Of course, everybody likes the films they want, but certainly Four Weddings and a Funeral had certain originality to it. First of all, the whole structure of having 5 events rather than a story which continued in any other way. And Notting Hill is the story of a rather down at heel bookseller in London who falls in love with this mega American star who happens to be passing through there and finds in the British man something real and authentic which he couldn't find in her lifestyle. In her celebrity lifestyle, and you have lots of fun with in both films, you have lots of fun with eccentric characters who are British but are really rather strange. There's the Scotsman in Four Weddings and a Funeral, and there's the flatmate of Hugh Grant in the in Notting Hill. So there's a certain number of tried and tested things to put in the films, but also I think that they have managed to find very good dialogue writers, and I think that goes for a lot. This is in the 1990s, end of the 1990s. Then a couple of Bean movies. Again, these are coming out of a television series, and something rather original in that there's very little dialogue. And it depends very much on Rowan Atkinson's capacities of gesture and mime. And Rowan Atkinson, seen as Mr. Bean, was so important that he actually had a role in the Olympic opening ceremony, where they had a very serious orchestra doing very serious music, but inside there they had this comedy sketch with this character. So it's this mix of, it's very serious and traditional, but it's very mocking as well. So these films are obviously intended for an international market, and which is just as well, because if they only sold in Britain, they just would not make enough money to be able to make a second one, if you like. Along a little later in 2004, then you have well, this is the second Bridget Jones one, I think. Yeah, I think there's three altogether. Again, we've got the same characters, the same actors here. Hugh Grant. When you see Hugh Grant, you know that you're going to get a certain kind of British romantic comedy. And Bridget Jones, then, so the story of a not particularly beautiful, at least that's how the film presents her, not particularly intelligent and skilled character, and what happens to her. So something original about this, it's a little bit, the film about the loser, and this perhaps proposes particular pleasures to the audience. Perhaps we're imagining, oh my goodness me, at least I don't make mistakes like that, and they enjoy it in some ways. And 1995, Funny Bones, about a slightly more intellectual film, I think. In 2003, they tried Love Actually, which is a little bit like Four Weddings and a Funeral, except that it is a Christmas story. And notice how it was sold there, the ultimate romantic comedy. Oh, so there's very romantic comedies, and the ultimate romantic comedy. And it did have some things that we were expecting: eccentric English people, Hugh Grant, and so on and so forth, but also a certain amount of originality, that this was like in a soap opera. There were several different stories. I think there were about 5 or 6 different stories, which in cinema we don't usually do this, but it's something we do in soap opera, follow 5 or 6 different stories. So there was something new about it. And of course, it was also what is often referred to as a feel-good movie, which doesn't seem to me to be a particular insult. I don't understand why people would particularly want to feel bad. So this is 2003. Throughout the 90s, from the 90s onwards, a particular animation group, Nick Park Productions, managed to get into the international market with these characters, and I believe it was at least originally made with stop motion, which is a particular technology, and involves then again eccentric people, regional people. These are Lancashire or northern people in any case, and this rather absurd humor. Yes, the curse of the Weir Rabbit and Shaun the Sheep, and what goes on with them. So humorous animation films, but probably not specifically for children. I think these are the sort of films where you take your children, but the adults like it just as much. And finally, there's one from just last year, which I haven't managed to see yet, which is an interesting idea that Jack wakes up one morning and the whole of the Beatles and their songs have disappeared from everybody's memory, and he's the only person. So there's a fantasy, obviously very enjoyable, and allows the audience to think, well, what would I do? What would I do if I won £1 million? What would I do if I woke up and I was the only person who remembered the Beatles songs? So just a few examples there of humor. So the British cinema plays on its reputation as the British people being very humorous, and there must be other people who are humorous as well, and I'm sure we have other qualities behind humor. But of course, cinema, when you want to sell millions, quite often you have to depend a little bit on stereotyping. But if you're smart, and if you're lucky, then you can mix some stereotyping in with some pretty good cinema humor dialogue, and even make people think that can happen too. Now, it has to be said that although many of these films were successes, nobody has the magic touch, as somebody said 100 years ago about musical comedy. You can make Superdog 1 and make £1 million, and Superdog 2 can be a complete failure. It's very difficult to judge the attitude of the public, and this gives the lie somewhat to some rather simplistic views about popular culture, which just says, oh well, Hollywood makes whatever it likes and then tells us to like it, and we like it, which is I believe a mistake. Now, there is a third category, a third genre of film, which is quite successful in the British production industry. But as I say, that when you come to cinema, you are not making films for the British. You're making films very generally for the international market, because that's the way that you're going to make enough money to allow you to make a second film. And another, if you like, specialism of the British cinema industry is films about ordinary people's lives and problems. If you like, this is sometimes referred to as social realism. It may or may not be realistic. That's a much more complicated question. What do you have in these films? Extremely frequently, they are not set in London. They are set in Glasgow, they are set in Manchester, they are set in Sheffield, they are, there's something about the regions of England with the accents and so on, and the working class atmosphere, at the industrial or post-industrial atmosphere, which allows this. Now, this brings up all sorts of questions about cinema. You know, why do people go to the cinema? Well, people go to the cinema for different reasons, but certainly two of the things which we recognize easily is, first of all, cinema as the dream factory. Hollywood was called the dream factory, and based on the idea that, you know, people very often have lives which are really quite difficult in many ways, and so perhaps they go to the cinema to see, you know, a dream. Yeah, you imagine yourself as a small bookseller in London, and then a mega American star falls in love with you. You know, so, and dreaming is an important part of why people go to the cinema, but it's not the only one, because people might also go for these rather more sometimes serious films which show ordinary people's lives. Now, are the kind of people who go to the cinema the kind of people the films are about? Hard to say, difficult one, but interesting question. Certainly, sometimes audiences like to see ordinary people on the cinema, because to see them on the cinema is to say they are important. And it has to be said that if you just watch a whole load of films at random, the number of films which are about the problems of rich people is absolutely enormous. And so it can be quite reassuring or validating to see the lives of ordinary people at the cinema, whether it's now, so they're not always very ordinary. They're sometimes quite at the bottom end of society, in the sense of the poorest and the most fragile. And here you have one from 2010, Ned's Not Educated Delinquents. Quite a violent film set up in Scotland. Brasstorf, which was translated into French, this is 96 then, Brasstorf, which was translated into French as Les Virtueuses, was both a romantic comedy and a film about the decline of industry in Britain, and in this case, the closing of a mine, and also showcasing a long tradition in British mines, and indeed in other British workplaces, the brass band, le fanfare. And so in this case, you have the situation of poorly paid workers waiting for their mine to be closed, and trying to maintain a bit of pride with their brass band, which is really rather more expensive than they can afford, but it's their bit of pride, it's theirs, and so they keep going with it. And you have the love interest come in, where a woman who is a management consultant comes into the band, and she both has a role in the band as well as being the love interest, but she also has a role in this question of whether they're going to close the mines or not. So both a social film and a romantic comedy together there. I will be speaking a little later about films by Ken Loach. This is one from 2012, but there are many more, which he's now become one of the best known of British film directors, always doing social films, which some people consider rather too depressing, but certainly which show poor and poor people with fragile lives who are very beautiful people who have a lot. They're not necessarily idealized, but they have very many positive sides, and quite often, although there cannot be a happy ending because there's so much oppression and exploitation and poverty, there is nevertheless an ending which is a bit of a respite, that something goes better for a short while. An Angel's Share is about 4 friends in Glasgow who discover high quality whiskey and whiskey tasting, and have a plan to solve some of their money problems in this way. Slumdog Millionaire, then about I think this one is I did see this one, but I can't remember it anymore. But it's about a television quiz show and an Indian gentleman who has very successful with it. Now, if we had a series, if we had back in the comedy section, a whole series of comedies whose aim is not to make you think about serious social problems, it has been the case recently that we've had a mix between films which look at serious social problems and perhaps make us think about them, but also are extremely funny. So here we have 2 of them from 1997 and 2002. Yeah, 2002, Bend It Like Beckham, then, where the serious question approached is growing up as a child of immigrants in Britain and finding some conflicts between what you as a young person want to do with your life and what your parents with more traditional views about what young people should do would like. And in this case, it's a young woman of from an Asian family who loves football. Now, it's an interesting film, is this, because in many ways it's an identical film to a previous film. Yeah, a young person who absolutely dreams of making a living from an activity which is normally considered not appropriate for their sex. Of course, the film is Billy Elliot, and I'm sure that the success of Billy Elliot made it much easier for Gurinder Chadha, the director, to find the money for this film. The other one, then, The Full Monty, is about a group of unemployed men who have this rather crazy idea that they're going to make some money by doing a strip show, although they are not, let's say, the most perfect specimens of physical manliness, and they're very touching, very endearing, and it certainly does involve serious social questions about being unemployed and what it can do to your family life and what it can do to your sense of pride in yourself and so on, and also very funny as well. Now, what I find very interesting about this film is that nobody imagined it would make a lot of money. And I once met one of the actors, and they were told when the film was prepared, you know, would you prefer to have a few £1,000s or a percentage of the profits? And they all said, well, thank you very much. We'll have a few £1,000s, please. And then it made millions. So this is interesting because I think it's still the case today, and I mentioned it previously, that the film industry and the directors do not know which films are going to make millions and which are not going to make millions. Okay, so that I'm going to end there on comedy. As you saw, that the next section on cinema is going to take a chronological approach and take us from the 1940s up to today, and that will take us another couple of chapters. So so far we've just looked at the 3 genres which are particularly successful for British cinema. We have to keep this in proportion. Yeah, Britain is not the biggest cinema in the world, or a long way from it, but it seems to survive. And one of the ways of surviving is to make sure there's something recognizable about British cinema, and certainly heritage films or humorous films or social realism films is one of the ways that it has been possible for British cinema to survive. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.